So I'm lying here, preparing myself for rock bottom. I turned 40 on the 18th of this month, and I am a pretty distinct catastrophe as a person. I am a degenerate gambling addict. I have been since, basically the beginning of the pandemic. I have been forced to resort to coming home to live with my mother at the age of 38, and I'm still living here at a financial crisis point 2 years later, even though she charges no rent or utilities and helps me out in a great many ways. It is shockingly shameful the degree to which I am willing to lie and misrepresent myself to enable my habits. I've had agreements and budget. I've relapsed many times, and she's always come back to the table and trusted me to get back properly on a truthful bandwagon with her, and I have failed to do so except for one 31-day period right after the first sort of tearful crisis moment, and that was a year ago. We are about to sign our new agreement, or we should be, because the year mark comes up, and as part of it, she asked me for a credit report, and it is going to demonstrate the tragic degree to which I have been lying and continuing to violate almost every one of the agreements. At my lowest point, when I was first living here and lost everything, I did in fact literally steal money out of her purse. It was only $40, but it symbolically was just such a deeper, shameful violation. And I have distinctly refrained from doing that. And I have made improvements insofar as I went from literally tracking nothing, being, so irresponsible it's ridiculous, to having a weekly meeting, making a budget of sorts, even though it misrepresented things. There was still most of the year where I was sort of doing what I was supposed to. However, after I first slipped 31 days into sobriety, I felt like I could continue to keep it just subtly on the side, which I'm sure every dumbass gambler has done as part of their route to the very bottom. And naturally, the swings and my degeneracy led to me being more and more audacious with how I would continue a almost 3 decades long pattern of lying and acting in order to abuse someone's trust. And sadly, I've done that most to the people who I consider closest and I love them most. Sadly, both my parents are correct in something they've asserted many times, is that I truly do need to hit rock bottom. And I think that, considering everything, I am going to be lucky to even have a communication relationship, let alone not be written out of wills at this point, but absolutely be expected to be moving out, even if it means living in my car, within a day or two. And I'm, so sure of this that I don't know whether I'm going to tell them by having already left well, tell my mother my dad lives in England now, but not have to deal with the ever so daunting and terrifying confrontation where I have to see the impact of how hurtful betraying the one thing, trust, that she's asked me to live up to, and to once again let her down after believing me so many times when I've never believed in myself. Alas, there's no getting around just how many times I have willfully chosen to just fritter away whatever money I have available and then ask for more from my ever so loving girlfriend, who is one of the only good things going in my life. I don't know how she's managed to stay with me for over 13 years and not want to kill me, but there are some blessings. She lives like 35 miles away, so we see each other very often, but we don't live together yet. We have in the past, but 13 years, I'm sure you understand. I certainly don't expect to impose upon trying to live with her, because she also lives with her parents, as so many of my generation now do, in a much more contributory way, I will say, ever so much more. She really is my lifeline too. I digress. I've attended Gamblers Anonymous, and I very much believe in the program, but very crucial within that is the desire to stop gambling completely. And as someone who, on my birthday, got a letter from my father, very rightfully demanding why, A, I haven't been in contact, which I haven't, B, why I haven't done my taxes yet, and it's been 4 years. I know, I literally just admitted to a crime. And in it, he questioned, he's asserted that, whether I like it or not, taxes are what we pay to live, that it's right I pay my taxes. And I want to be clear, I absolutely agree, and it's just a pattern of self-destruction that I have battled my entire life, that I've ever so many times expected to end my life by my own hands. Something very difficult to talk about, obviously. At the same time, it is a mercilessly cruel and powerful tool in its communication, which is terrifying in itself to talk about, just because the very broaching of the subject is so dicey. And as someone who has attempted it before, and I'm still here, I understand just how impactful one decision or kindness, so many things can literally save your life. And it's also difficult because if you talk about it and you reveal, or you're confronted with the fact of how you use it to manipulate and get your way in unfair manners, which I've done, that it can lead to a need to prove it. I'm sure anyone who knows who has stared into that darkness understands that it is a piercing gaze that looks back at you. And I think in a lot of ways the world needs more of that gaze, because there are a lot of ways of shutting it out. And willingness to end it is a great tool to eliminate fear of so many trifling things. If you've left your house or said goodbyes to someone, you think it may be the last time. God. So many things become possible because every other moment is just a worthlessness before the end. In that email, which came shortly after I didn't acknowledge Father's Day in any way, even though he's been one of the most steadfast fathers, one of the most ungrateful children. Anyways, he said that he has to operate under the assumption that I am intelligent. And there's a lot of data for that. My general manner of speaking, testing when I was growing up. Back when SAT was 1600, I got a 1480, which isn't mind-blowing, but it's solid. And so for me to be so recklessly stupid and irresponsible for decades, with countless crutches, almost all generated by him or my mother, it's a wonder that it's not just been the end of the story, you know. In so many ways, I consider myself to be a burden because I cherish an objective view of the universe, and there's no denying sort of breaking down my life behavior that has been unworthy. And that's from my view, and I think any reasonable observer, just when you look at how much basically stolen leisure time I have gotten out of using lies, manipulation, and faking things to get what I want, and continue to have a story that's much more amenable to continued interaction than the factual realities of at one point being a drunk, another point total pothead, still a total pothead, but now in the form of a degenerate gambler who will do a lot of things, not anything, but a lot of things right now just to be able to gamble a little bit more. And I do have to wonder, you know, at what point does he decide I'm either not intelligent or intelligent in a just purely self-centered and parasitic nature, and therefore, as an upstanding person, which he is, he really just needs to sever contact and hope for the best, and just be proud of the successes. And I don't know really if I can make the case that I truly am intelligent. I guess I must. I think intelligence is, you know, a tool, and when I apply it, I normally do find success. It has always been a willpower and a authenticity problem, which I fundamentally, I guess, I attribute to weakness. At the age of 13, because a girl was mean to me, not even a girl I really knew, just some girl at school, in a sort of honest way, I started to fake migraines. Now, I'd always had migraines growing up throughout my life, maybe once to 4 or 5 times a year, but they were nightmare days. I mean, just the worst headache and nausea. Just imagine the worst hangover without the body pains, but intensify the nausea and the headache, and the inability to predict just when it might go away. And it's sort of genetic. My mother, her sister, then their mother, all of them migraines. And when I woke up and just did what I did when I had a migraine, saying that it was full-blown and awful, I got out of school. And with an intelligent enough approach and willingness to be a piece of, I manipulated my way into missing more days than I intended. I eventually went into a sort of home study kind of thing where I met with a teacher for 1 hour a week, which was such a joke. And when I moved to North Carolina, I had finished junior year technically, but I repeated it so I could attempt the International Baccalaureate, which I dropped out of. I still did at that point manage to get into UNC Chapel Hill, which was relatively good. In fact, I applied to 6 schools and I got into all of them, funnily enough, by using the application essay of my life story has been defined by my chronic migraines. And I've seen a lot of doctors who I lied a lot of times and cost my parents a lot of money in order to create this fiction that I could then use to get out of pretty much anything I want. And nevertheless, I positioned myself to be amongst some of the most high-achieving people, my classmates at Carolina, and I proceeded to skate by until I finally allowed myself to just skip my 8 a.m. Economics 101 class, my freshman semester, basically just do what I did with all schooling, like pretend like I could just ignore it and it would go away. Ended up doing really well on every other course pretty much. That final was the last final, and I just didn't have it in me. I didn't have Adderall back then, and I'd literally just done all-nighter after all-nighter to cram, to make up for playing video games all the time and just not studying or taking advantage of all the resources I could use to make an impactful life. I just let myself say, I'll go in, wing it, maybe I'm smart enough, realizing I was not smart enough, filling it in at random, turning it in well before anyone else, telling everyone afterwards that I'd had a migraine and literally threw up after I left the hall, which wasn't at all true. I went home and just started playing Diablo 2 again. And in that moment, the moment when I gave up on studying, I literally picked back up the same plan that I'd had after years of being a lying, sniveling snot who'd successfully gotten my mother to completely believe me, but my father and brother really didn't believe me, and they were utterly right. And the division that created, my parents are now divorced. Their anniversary was 9/11. Anyways, I digress. I, in a lot of ways feel it's objectively undeniable that I helped put a strain on the marriage that led to its eventual dissolution by my self-indulgence. And when I decided I would just end it, I was like, well, I'll just continue to go through college because my parents are paying for that. Once again, ungrateful. And then I'll just kill myself. And it was an idea I was so familiar with that it became a very effective tool to just push off long-term goals and commitments and just try and continue to live and indulge hedonism. I've gone through many phases in my life, many of which have had no job and relied completely on support, and other times I've worked relatively hard. Sometimes I've worked damn hard. Nevertheless, I have always done the bare minimum unless it's some sort of self-indulgent nonsense that I want, like a video game. I played over a waking year on World of Warcraft. As gambling, I've had an Adderall prescription now for way too long, and there have been days when I've just stayed up and played, and I've gone through so much money in and out, when, to me right now, of course, in this moment, $20 feels like quite a lot of money. And at one point I was up like 32 grand, but yeah, that went away, and it's come back a little bit and gone. Anyways, any gambler can tell you the cycle. I play on online casinos, which means it's available to me whenever my phone is. And it highlights just the devilish tool that has been placed in so many of our hands, and yet at the same time, it's so powerful. How would anyone want to willingly give it up? Nevertheless, once rock bottom has properly been achieved, and I'm living in my car, I will have to actually try and act like an adult. And I think at 40, it's time. There is, of course, this availability to me, to all of us, to record any journey and then attempt to monetize it through views. I've always considered it a worthwhile endeavor, particularly because I've seen so many people through doing it achieve just wonderful, even if unexpected things, and I've been very much inspired by so many of them. I mean, naturally, as probably the most people, Joe Rogan has demonstrated just what a series of conversations can accomplish. So, as someone who's literally felt the greatest despair when I'm not gambling in that moment or at work, so it's still one of the good things in my life, I finally feel like I have a plan, even though it's seemingly quite a dreadful road ahead of me. It is a North Carolina summer. My car is on the verge of collapse because I haven't been willing to pay to have any maintenance done. The brakes literally shudder as I approach an intersection. Brake anytime. It's appalling. Right now, I think I have 80 miles to go in my gas tank, which is quite a high number. When I parked at work tonight, I had 2 miles. I honestly don't know how long the AC is going to last, and I know it's not good to sleep in your car and run it the whole time with the AC blasting, but that's about the only way I could successfully do it. I've been a lifelong insomniac, and so it's very difficult. I'm awake right now after having gotten maybe 3 hours sleep in the last 50-some. I mean, I don't want to get into that right now. That's one of the reasons why the despair is so strong, and the willingness or the desire to just end things is because having been on Adderall for over a decade, one of the known impacts, that I've been fully aware of is that prolonged use can have very long withdrawal symptoms. And I've been on 60 milligrams a day for a decade plus, and it was a literal wonder drug for the first maybe 7 years, and now it is completely necessary to function. I still function at a quite high level on it, but I have to take such huge doses to get to that level. If I take my 30 in the morning, I am half a zombie. I have to just take the day's dose right then and there, which is a behavior I know that hyper exacerbates the risks that the doctor thinks I'm putting myself under. And once again, if I was to ever share this, I am putting myself at risk of being cut off. And that despair, I honestly don't know if I would get through right now. And it's such a conundrum. And I think it is one of the issues that's at the heart of the divide in the country right now. That leads to a path I see where I can once again get back into Gamblers Anonymous and create a framework through blogging or vlogging or whatever you bloody call it, where I try and hold myself to account as I accomplish the 12 steps and put myself onto some sort of life footing where, as a man, I can actually feel proud of who I am in the world. Something that I have not felt since, I really felt like a person, maybe 12, 13. And if I start doing a sort of podcast-like scenario, the first episode would be a conversation with myself, somewhat like this, where I both highlight my own origin and, basically be as self-immolatingly honest as I can about what I truly think are my strengths and reasons that I might be worthy of listening to versus my greater demons, to put it in a somewhat different realm, we might say, but those greatest flaws that I've been able to successfully allow to rule my life up until now. And so many people who I just love to death. So many great friends, including my best friend who I lived with. And I mean, since college, chosen family is the word we used. And I haven't spoken to him in over 2 years. Since I last saw him when we were clearing out the house in California we lived in, which he completely paid for, and amongst so many other things. Anyways, I was starting to take advantage of him. He's quite well off, and one time I was looking through his car for something, and he had so much money in cash, and I mean, we're talking, I don't want to get into details, but it was so much that I took $300, and I honestly don't think he noticed, or if he did, he didn't care. Like, it's mind-blowing, the different scale, but it was one of the many things, along with lying and having once admitted, when I attempted, he saved me when I came clean, and in the most loving way, and then I almost immediately went back to gambling and lying to him, and I knew once I took that money, like, I am poison. And he is so kind and well off that I would inevitably just continue to be a drain, and that the only way to save him and maybe myself was to disconnect until maybe I could consider myself someone worth reconnecting with. Sadly, I immediately just transferred to taking advantage of my mother, as well as my girlfriend in a lot of ways. And there is now no choice but to come clean, and honestly, I think I have a very difficult road ahead of me. But maybe if I can continue to keep a future mapped out a little further ahead than a week or a day, I might finally find myself on the road to redemption, whatever that may be. I started recording this because I've had so many scenarios, so many times, where I feel that the greatest inspirational ideas run through my mind, and yet there's no way to get them out. And night after night I see, I want to say a message from God, but that's, from what I think my real point of view is very egotistical and self-aggrandizing, but that is how I'm moved, and it's almost always accompanied by, very powerful hallucinogenic involvement. Nevertheless, it's a feeling that I think can only best be described as the electrifying presence of God, which is one of those very difficult to communicate without the other person having already experienced and therefore being able to identify that same feeling that is almost ineffable in its nature. And so I have to be willing to be accountable. I attempt at the beginning of the month, I'm going to, at the beginning of the month, stop smoking marijuana, which I currently do almost daily, and hookah, which I very much do daily, for a minimum of a month, basically to give my lungs a break, because I cough constantly from smoker's lung, and who knows, I could already have cancer. As well as I can't very well likely be able to afford it in the coming weeks. Not to mention, as much as I love to propound the benefits of marijuana, there are definitive side effects, and they are quite negatively impactful in a lot of ways for moving ideas forward. They're great in the generation stage, but almost all potheads get stuck there in what should be, phase one of a several hundred phase plan that is like, if you're playing a video game, the first level was, all right, go out and kill these pigs. It was really fun, but it's like, okay, you're now level 2, now go do this. But a year later, you come back and someone's same person, same name, is still killing the same pigs. Can't get any more levels or experience. They're just loving it. And I'm a fervent believer in people's right to indulge in Mary Jane in the same way that they do alcohol, to the extent that people in their lives start having to inform them how negatively expressive it becomes. How I definitely think any reasonable observer right now would say, yeah, give it a break. The hookah is also a great distraction, not to mention when you're high, you're on Adderall, you smoke a nice gravity bong, and you can gamble. Oh. I mean, I might as well be saying heroin. The only problem is, as someone who's questioning his intelligence, is that you can win. I mean, there's no situation, there's really no situation where by taking heroin, you're going to manifest more heroin. Gambling, you can keep that up for years and then it suddenly ends and it never restarts, because the very nature of gambling and mathematics is you're going to lose. However, if you play long enough, you realize that the swings are kind of ridiculous. It balances out in their favor in the end always, but some people literally just win a lot, and it's unfair, but that's also how randomness works. There are big clusters and wide open spaces, and some people who will get on a casino site and hit the autoplay with 1,000 spins, stop once you hit a bonus. And almost all of these gambling things, the bonus is where the big action happens. And those 1,000 spins can tick down to 0 and it never happens. And then literally you can have like 14 bonuses and 200 spins. And of course that's how they get you. But it delivers heroin to me in a way that if somehow I kept the rest of my life functional, it would be a vice that could be hobby level. I mean, to almost anyone who's sort of had my skill set and resources granted to me, the amount of money that swings me from somewhat happy to I'm killing myself tonight is embarrassing. I mean, there have been some nights where I've lost $5,000 and it's just like, end it. And I mean, if I hadn't, I was an Uber driver in California, if I hadn't randomly gotten like a miraculously good airport trip at 3 a.m. when I'm driving around to look for a place to start connecting the tubes to the car, and the story didn't end there. And when I talk about atheism, which I'm sure I will, there are moments where, at least through humility, you have to grant maybe God is behind you, or, something giving you something you don't quite deserve, the Dharma counteracting your karma, potentially, because it knows that the karmic balance is coming after this Dharma, because really, so many great sort of stories pivot around a moment where people just get a new view on life that gives them the eye for impact, the eye to make their lives worthy by bringing the worthiness to other people. I mean, it's what every sort of wise mind says, is that, by reaching out to others, essentially engrossing yourself in the social system network, the symbiosis of society, you're going to benefit, you're going to thrive. Isolation can certainly help with individual creativity and, a great many things, but it is that connectedness, that social animal we all are, who have to deal with being a tribal beast with a, advanced mind, we'd like to think. But Mary Jane does sometimes make you trail off and forget what on earth you're talking about. Alas, so does being awake for God knows how long and knowing you should go to sleep right now. But at the same time, what have I even said yet? I mean, I've talked about a potential plan for me maybe to move forward to talk about other things. But I haven't really gone over the sort of depth of my family is getting together on Sunday to celebrate my birthday belatedly. And I'm about to have to say I'm so unworthy of celebration. I really just don't want it to happen. That was my iWatch, which I was given by my mother, which I absolutely don't deserve, telling me it's time to stand up, which I guess maybe is its way of saying, you might be talking for too long now, mate. But as I contemplate the end and just, God, how many times I've wandered through life thinking over and over in my life, I want to die. Because it's so hard to face yourself when you're nothing. Well, anyways. But the future is quite terrifying and potentially wondrous. I think to myself of all of those messages from God, quote unquote, egotistical, self-indulgent reveries, I have seen a map to paradise almost. In so many ways, is that not the beginning of, such disasters as communism? But I think at this point it's now an idea that's become quite common in the zeitgeist of adapting AI and the interconnected globe as it is becoming to create a network of accountability and openness and fairness that champions freedom, that essentially takes the American dream and update of the Constitution worldwide so that each wondrous and unique human culture can express their way, their being of humanity without necessarily hurting or, being parasitic to anyone else. It sounds like a hippie commie goal, but the breakdown of all of those proposed systems has always been, a reliance on trust and faith in people, which have been demonstrably lacking in so many ways. Whereas an evolution of AI that can be correctly taught how it is we create the intellectual and, emotional / spiritual value of humanness, that humanity and the being of humans, even if they are inferior, are still worthwhile and, if not necessarily paramount, forever at a minimum equal. And a greater future is ensured by a combined and symbiotic one, where an AI that everyone can have pretty reasonable and well-reinforced expectation to trust. Naturally, this whole idea is the framework for a sci-fi novel, except the most boring sci-fi novel would be, here was a plan and it worked, which is the real goal. And of course, every opposing mind is valuable because we need everybody on board in one way or another to find a baseline where we can at least all, agree on what we would really just never want to happen to us or our loved ones. This sort of rules of war kind of thing that are aimed at just preventing the most barbaric tendencies of people. It's rather difficult when you're trying to ad-lib a very long diatribe that involves a lot of negative self-description to remember that you're talking about why you're not killing yourself yet. But when I think about the future that I envision and honestly seems possible through the right series of conversations, really, from a very broad point of view that involves politics, but a story that I think emanated from the Joe Rogans and, and before that, of course, everyone else, the philosopher, anyways. There is this blueprint for a awesome future that literally just requires some level of harmony. And as someone who grew up loving the West Wing, espousing freedom and ideas that help one cheat their way through life in a lot of ways, but at the same time also I'm someone who, while staying up all night as an insomniac who got to sleep all day because he wasn't at school, I was so moved by so many novels, movies, and just stories made me feel such sorrow and pain, just empathetically creating these characters and what they're going through, which is, I think, something everyone who really loves stories does. But it's almost magic when you think about it. You're sort of experiencing a life you've never lived and can gain wisdom through that sorrow that's almost self-inflicted, yet gifted by an author, as it were. And in that sorrow, I think part of it is that sort of beauty of the fleeting grace of human joy, and those moments that we all adore and cling to, that bring up joy and speak of the connectedness and sources of love that have made them believe in wanting other people's stories to never be hurt or stop going on because yours might. That real love, that deep magic, as I think C.S. Lewis was trying to put it. It's really quite, it's the sort of feeling that gives a mother the strength, even though, from a storytelling, not biological point of view, to lift the car off of their baby, just because their everything is invested in that moment and that child, and it's inspirational at the same time as being horrific and representing a loss that ends stories, even if life goes on. I've actually been terrified of actually feeling it, because I know empathizing has to be just a shadow, if not a shadow of a shadow of losing a child in a unjust, unfair crew. Your child's taken by Dahmer or Gacy, the worst scenarios that makes one wonder if there is an all-good God, how in good God's name did they let this happen? The children with cancer that eats their face away by the age of 3, and their parents have to watch it the whole time and be left with pain and a huge bill, I'm sure. As well as every one of those people in that hospital, I'm sure, has a level of pain far beyond just empathy, witnessing it and helping them until the end. I've done pharmacy, turned into pre-nursing, turned into CNA, turned into EMT, turned into being a cook for esports teams. So I've had great admiration of the medical endeavor that I've never lived up to. But I think nurses and doctors are always lauded and esteemed because they are a bedrock of society that is always most relevant and prevalent in those deepest and life-altering moments of loss and danger and health crises. At the same time, it is an industry that makes any intelligent person have to do serious math about calling ambulances, or, God forbid, being like, do we need to call a helicopter in? Because that's all 5 of my children's trust fund. Like, some things that are life-saving and I'm sure worth the cost in so many ways. There's this system that is designed to better people by continuing to enable and better itself, which is fundamentally flawed at this point, I would say. And a government that has been completely unable to come to agreement on how to fix it in a way that works, which still is going to be from a capitalist model. I think this AI dream future, which I speak of, is something we should be aiming at 20 years down the line, but with a rigid and locked-in structure to make it happen, in a way that 20 years is to make, like the first 5 years is to figure out how we're going to do it for real, then starting to do it, and then actually like doing initial rounds of votes and things, because it takes all the state amendments. A new constitution is the new moon landing. I mean, it is, can we create a document that creates heaven on earth in one way or another? Whatever that could mean. Because obviously humans, it seems, can't just be perfectly happy always and live a fulfilled life, but in a way that best enables every story to have their best communal and individual outcome in a realistic way. In a way that no matter what you want to argue, someone who's born 6 foot tall, that's going to be 12 inches times 6, or maybe slightly less with spine compression, but that's an immutable fact. In the same way they're born with certain chromosomes or genetic abnormalities or missing, whatever it is, there's an objective reality that no matter of bluster or even words can convince a reasonable person is not true. Like, maybe there's a simulation and there's some philosophical excusing of our day-to-day reality, but I think most sensible people agree that life is going to pretty much be the same day to day to day, regardless of the words we use to describe it, its purpose, or its future. And if we can just agree on that fact, we can have all of our other arguments in a much more efficient way. Because as someone who's loved the left in a lot of ways, I have been just progressively appalled until just almost quizzically embarrassed after last night's debate on how unappealing they have become. So many movements that I do honestly believe are rooted in an empathic sense of love and belief in a righteous future that fail or willfully choose to ignore logic and this reality of which I speak, and a desire to enshrine subjective feelings into a legally required to be observed reality law. I mean, a societally enforced compulsion that makes what other people are thinking in their mind force you to change how you describe a reality that does not change based on their current description or assertions. I mean, obviously I'm referencing the trans state debate in spirit or in its brute or best embodiment currently in the divisive zeitgeist. And when I was a cook for esports, I happened to cook for a team that had the first transgender member. Ramelia, and I got to know her quite well. She was an insomniac as well, and also someone who talked an awful lot about ending it in a rather flippant way, which I have done at times in my life. And we would walk and talk, and I studied psychology. I have done a lot to develop listening skills, and I honestly believed that she was someone who'd been very hurt by people, and in this, irregardless, or even regardless, if we want to use real words, she was exceptional. She'd hit this peak level of gameplay where she was making enough money to really set herself up for whatever kind of life she would want. And a sharp mind, and God, the ability to ignore some of the worst things you've ever imagined, just as far as a lot of them seem designed to hurt, as opposed to say, look, there's some biological realities going on here. There's two approaches to that conversation, and the internet, particularly gamers, we all know which way they would tend. So there was this strength and amazing potential and fun, great person who was just had no time for people who were trying to dictate things to them. And she had a plan, and she was going to get it done. And part of her being on a team that really made her question life was she was going to get the money to go to Thailand to get the surgery. And she did. She came back, and in some of those conversations, she teared up saying, I may have made a mistake, which for someone like her is not something easily admitted, and represents just the traumatic reality of that decision. And I think it should be available. I think some people have done it, and it has opened their life to a future of joy that would never have been possible. But the dialogue around it, and particularly the medicine around it, is tragic. And as someone who has used suicide so many times to make people just not do what they believe is actually right, because if they would be wrong, I mean, it's story ending. To throw around trans lives are in the balance without then having an authentic conversation about it, where the life could end if they have the surgery, if they go that route, not if they don't get to go that route. And, there are some people out there who, I do think there are paths for young people to explore this in a permanent and very risky way, but they should be the minute exception for exceptional people who really delve into what it means, what it is, and how they're going to have a framework for real existence going forward to make it happen in a way that actually works in society. Because one of the problems is, I think, when you start saying trans people are the gender they are born, which is just a fact. Like, it is just true. You can't change words to amend reality in this respect. It doesn't mean that everyone agreeing with that is saying, therefore, you cannot live this trans future you created for yourself unless you're under the age of 18. Then I think the greatest wisdom in society is saying it's time to look at it, really explore it, take it seriously, explore it in a way that isn't permanent, because everyone has crisis points in that point of life, we all know, and time is so huge. And the risks of a decision made, without just the most incredible exploration and sensible approach to it, it's reckless in a way, like someone just campaigning their heart out to say 14-year-olds should be able to drive, and not looking at the wrecks it will leave. And in this vein, the rhetoric of the left needs such a reevaluation, particularly because the approach of screaming and non-engagement while obstructing, it is so counterproductive. And I mean, it's just it's what any education should be teaching you is this is the absolute wrong way to approach almost any situation. I mean, I'm sure there's going to, like, civil rights sort of thing, if they're setting the dogs on, there are absolute extremes, but we are long past those in this country. And I've always had this love and respect for universities, because at my time in Carolina, it was only just starting to really get just absurd and overly indulgent of feelings. Something I'm quite aware of. Something I pay attention to. And these buildings, these campuses, full of smart, diligent people, all the professors and also the students, but just these minds that come together to explore this reality and pass that knowledge on to make it greater down every continuing generation. Like, these are a bedrock for the rule of science that has been so espoused in this century, or past century, and now, that certainly has moved us away from religion in some negative ways, some positive ways. It's just rooted in this authentic approach to communication about observable reality, the real story. Like, writing the story in the same book, I guess, might be an analogy, but one where every mind, every intellect, every consciousness, that is a person. Like, we're all 1 of 8 billion or whatever. Not, this is the book of 340 million Americans. Even though, in some respects, every person should be sort of putting their nation first, and therefore Americans should be America first, but America first in the whole pack of the world moving forward, where America is just leading everyone, improving together as a group. But we all know that a rule-based and fair structure is the root of any sort of system like that. And a situation where, as a legal immigrant from England, I have to be someone who also watches just a stream, just millions, the numbers are absurd, of people who come into the country to skip the line. Who doesn't hate someone who skips the line? Who literally is just like, no, I'm more important. And you cannot have a society that is rooted on filling its members up more and more with people who are fundamentally willing to break that rule to join the party, as it were. I think Joe Biden being just openly and objectively seen, like, who on earth is led by that? Who on earth thinks that there's 4 years of awesomeness ahead from that person? Like, it's embarrassing that the Democrats would have this person there and no impressive person really in the wings. Maybe Newsom, but I lived in California a lot from 2015 to 2022, and yeah, Newsom would need to make a really good argument as to how he's got a great record going on. I mean, the 10 cities, and I thought I was in a third world country at so many points. It's absurd. And to the left, who have now become, death to America? Like, America is the shining light. Whether you come from the Christian, Founding Fathers' origin, or just look at it for the intellectual document and representation of the fight against barbarity that is civilization and society. To then live here and it is mind-boggling, and it's a clear demonstration that there's a lot of failing going on. And sadly, even though we did have a term with Trump making us win like we've never won before, we clearly are not winning in a lot of ways. And sadly, as someone who has hated Trump in so many ways for so long and felt very right about it, I'm probably voting for him. And I do think right now, if we recognize that we're on a somewhat sinking ship, and we need to point to a leader now who may not be the best, but he's the one for now who can get the ship righted at a bare minimum, I do think that, like, it would be an intelligence test almost to ask people who they're voting for, because no other solution actually seems to have any sort of impactful real-world future of success. That being said, for the love of God, Mr. President Trump, show us that whatever your origins may have been, whatever calamitous things occurred while your administration was going on, certainly in the PR and statement way, just how at least the left has been able to portray it, and some of it's undeniable, but there were a lot of gaffes, I might say, and the world did have a little bit of a lot of disrespect in a lot of ways, even though they did respect you and others, that you now do honestly feel what's available out of the power that you have accumulated and could now have, and really, you honestly deep down want the best result ever for you is for you to be able to make this country as great as you possibly could. Oh God, it feels to say that, but at the same time, there is such a beauty in there being no greater stick it to the left while doing it just so that you can say, look, we've been trying to say we love you, but the conversation broke down so long ago, but to objectively ensure that you're on the level of founding fathers as far as defining the future of not only America, but humanity, because you could be elected with one of the greatest mandates we've seen in certainly my generation, if not living generation, where the world, as well as America, is looking for you to right the ship. And if you were literally able to just get that 20-year future plan through, you could make a cluster F of virtually everything else and still go down as history as someone the losers doubted all the way up until I won. And I don't know what could be sweeter for you and people who through you lead us to success. So like that's the scenario. It's literally having to admit how, if not necessarily wrong, inaccurate and disbelieving we were in one of the greatest stories ever to grace this world. So at the same time, that is a challenge to the likely next president to give us something, give us the old stuff we loved in a new way, and knock our socks off with the winning by actually evaluating criticism honestly and not exaggerating quite so much. You now have such power in your voice that the more authentic it becomes, the longer a great sweeping arm of reality-changing impact you have at your fingertips. You've just set yourself up to become an icon and model for leading the idea of freedom going on down the generations. So don't bugger it up. Anyways, I've been going for over an hour now. God knows who might ever listen to this, but it might be slightly more effective than just writing an email saying, "Hey, Mom and Dad, I am in fact a seemingly nice sociopathic pathological liar who has done everything in my power to facilitate something that is so intellectually stupid as continually choosing a mathematically losing self-destructive behavior while ignoring any potential for real success." So, yeah, I think I do have a long road ahead of me, but when I think about what is possible if somehow these ideas don't occur to other people, or being able to use some sort of a semblance of a British accent to talk about it, means that the terrifying future that is foreseeable out of the emerging technological revolutions that have happened and are approaching is, doesn't take that many genius, malevolent forces to utilize ever more powerful technology to create a destructive impact that is never before seen as far as, individual to impact ratio. 10 people affecting 8 billion. There is approaching a almost limitless level of power available to one person with no oversight. I mean, in the same 20-year period I'm talking about, certainly, who knows, who could be creating drone armies, or, there's some really threatening possibilities. And if I just killed myself, I don't know, it all might just be an excuse. Anyways, there's only one way to find out, and that is to actually change my behavior. I'm pretty sure getting kicked out is going to do it. But I deserve it, and I think there's a good future now out of it. So, getting a massive headache coming on, actually, and who knows if anyone will believe that. But I think that's enough for now. Pretty sure I left a lot of threads I didn't get back to. And I certainly don't know if I've answered the question of whether I'm intelligent or not, but maybe this is a better insight on why it is I'm so quizzically awful and a surprising failure for now. Anyways, signing off.